I started thinking about how long you and I have known each other and kind of why we know each other. And as far as I can remember, it kind of boiled down to when you were at University of Wyoming in Laramie. You were coaching a judging team, and we just kind of got to be friends from there. And that's been what,
At
20,
least,
20 years, maybe
yeah, yeah, 20 years
15, maybe
ago.
15, maybe.
Honestly, I think it was probably I started at the University of Wyoming in 2009. So, and I did the judging team, started in 2010, so at least 14 years, but it does seem like 20 years.
It's been a while.
Yeah.
You had some good teams there. I remember you had a team that was what, reserve at the World Show.
Yep.
Yeah, that was back in the good days. Then I came to judge for you, I think, out in where was that? Douglas,
You
maybe?
judged, yeah, the State Wyoming Horse Show in Douglas.
It's been a while ago, but you got quite a diverse background. And with this podcast, obviously we're doing revolving around horses, and your background is in horses, but this is a little different episode because you, to me, are the donkey and mule queen. You're the expert as far as anybody I know. When I read some of your publications and go back to some of that stuff, you're all over the place doing a whole lot with donkeys
Yep.
primarily, right?
Yeah, I've tried to do more with the mules in the past several years just because there's absolutely no research dedicated to them. And a lot of it too is like the market value of the mules in a developing country or here in the US, they're worth even more than the donkeys are. And we know absolutely nothing. So I've started trying to do more mule focused research. They just make a really hard research subject because there's so much genetic diversity in their background. A lot of times we don't know what the mare side was, we don't know what the donkey side was. So that sometimes can affect, the results that we're getting. But it's like you have to start somewhere. So
Right. Right.
yeah, I've
We're,
been
and we're
trying
going
to
to get into a bunch.
find.
I've got some questions for you about the research side of things too, because I think
Cool.
that's very intriguing and interesting. But I want to back up just a little bit farther just to give the listeners some idea of your background and where you've been. You did a undergraduate degree at University of Georgia, master's
Right.
degree at University of Georgia, and then a PhD at like Michigan State, so up north, I
Oh,
think.
that's right. Up north, my
Yeah.
first snow experience.
That was your first snow experience. Okay.
Yep.
Are you from Southern Georgia then?
I'm actually from northern Georgia where we get a dusting of snow, but nothing like lake effect snow in the Midwest.
Right.
So yeah, right below Athens. So I've always been a Georgia Bulldog fan. So grew
Okay.
up in a
Well,
little
right
town called
below,
Matt.
you're close to Atlanta, then not too far away.
Yeah.
And currently you are an assistant professor at UC Davis. And you,
Um, it actually changed associate now.
oh, that's correct. I'm sorry. I totally forgot about that. That's fantastic.
That's all right.
A much deserved, I pulled up they haven't changed it on your website yet. You need to have them change it.
Okay.
Much deserved promotion to associate professor. You've been at UC Davis for a few years now,
Yeah, 8 or 9 years.
8 or 9 years, and primarily is your appointment mostly in teaching,
It's 100% teaching.
100% teaching? And you told me the other day, I think you told me you had like 5 or 6 classes a semester or something pretty heavy.
Yeah, we're on the quarter system still, so I usually teach a couple courses a quarter. Ranges anywhere from equine exercise physiology to reproduction physiology. So,
And all that has to do with horses. Or do you teach some background in donkeys and mules?
well, they're all quote equine courses. And so since they're equine, the term really applies to anything in the equidae family. So I try to include horses, donkeys, mules, ponies. If I have a little bit of zebra information that can apply, I also include that because most of our students want to go to vet school. A lot of them have maybe an interest in equine, but they also have a zoo interest. So I try to include everything under that equine umbrella. So when they get to vet school, they're prepared.
Nice. And you guys have a vet school right there at UC Davis. I think it's always
Yeah.
ranked in top 2 or 3 vet schools in the country.
Yeah. They're ranked number one this year. So
Yeah, I was going to say
just
number one, but I didn't want to pull away from some of the other schools as well. And then I talked to you the other day just trying to get this together, and you were at the Olympics.
yes. Yeah. I got to see the show jumping individual finals and the prelims. So that was a lot of fun. I just have so much respect for great horses and horsemen. And that was quite a treat. The energy was fantastic.
It's got to be a little different when you see it on TV. Those jumps look like they might be kind of big, but in person, it's pretty wild how high these horses are getting up and the
Um,
athleticism that the horses are giving
yeah,
us is pretty wild.
yeah, they're absolutely incredible. I mean, they're so big, they're so challenging, and then you think like about the horse's physiology and their vision and how they can see and how that just adds to the level of difficulty. Yeah, it was just I've been to a lot of horse shows. I've been to Grand Prix jumps, jumping contests before, but there is nothing that replaced the energy that was throughout the stands. And I felt like every spectator knew every horse and was riding every jump with them, and everybody just came together and they were so supportive of everyone that competed. So it was fantastic. It was
Was
quite
the crowd pretty big?
there were 16,000 people there, and it was a sellout for every equestrian event. And then the venue was amazing. It was the Palace of Versailles, which was really built around the royal horse stables like 600 years ago. So it was quite an experience. So I'm
If you
very
didn't watch
excited.
it on, if you didn't watch it, they were talking on there about how they built some bridge across the water that the horses ran across. I don't know if you saw that or not, but it was they were talking about that very thing that they'd had these events in the past, but it had been so many years. I don't remember what the year, long time. This was the first time in forever, and they built this water crossing, and they didn't know if the horses would go over it. It seemed like they all did, and it had quite a bit of history. I didn't realize that much history on the grounds there, but it seemed like it was.
Yeah, yeah, it was. I can't think of a more appropriate place where they could have hosted the equestrian events.
And did you get to go to any other events, watch swimming or?
No, I would have loved to have actually seen swimming because I'm a big Martian fan, but and maybe the gymnastics and tennis, but I was just all focused on the one. So and that it was just such an event. It took so much energy just to go to that and be all encompassed in each rider and horse. So no, I didn't make it to anything else.
How was it easy to find housing and get around the city?
Um, I actually stayed at a hotel that was advertised as being right across the street from the palace, which it was. But it's still about a 45-minute walk back to where the events were taking place. And actually, the U.S. equestrian team was staying there along with Australia. So it was kind of a popular venue. So,
Nice.
yeah.
You got to see quite a bit of the city probably and uh,
Yeah.
the horses. That's pretty neat. Amy, I want to go back to just to get kind of kick us off here. You're talking about the diversity in your background. I was looking at the website earlier, just your kind of your small bio here, so you could probably got more to add to this, but it kind of mentioned like when you were at the University of Georgia, your focus was in equine science as an undergrad. Then you did dairy science
Yeah.
as in reproductive area, I guess, or maybe an emphasis in reproductive physiology, and then went into a PhD more in a behavioral nutrition, general management kind of focus, specifically into this donkey diversion, if you will. So you've got this not only diversity within equine, but also subject matter, nutrition, management and behavior, reproduction. How did you formulate that? Because a lot of people are, as undergrads especially, are always asking these questions about how do I get involved in an area? How do I get specialized in an area? They all think they have to be vets at one point because they haven't really explored this idea. And you seem like a great person to be able to kind of highlight how you came to this general consensus of how you wanted to handle your career.
Yeah, that's a great question. I just, I was one of those people, and I still firmly believe this. And I think it's so important for our undergraduate students or just, youth growing up in life is when one door opens, and it's kind of a cliche, but when a door opens with an opportunity, you know, step out there and try it. And that's what happened with the dairy science. It's just a few more classes as an undergrad to add that. and I liked the demeanor of the dairy cattle. I thought they were kind of interesting and cool. And so I added that as a second major. And again, going back to pre-college and how much equine and youth programs like 4-H and FFA really played a part in kind of molding me to where I've gotten today. But I was real involved in 4-H and horse judging and public speaking and things like that. So when I was at the University of Georgia, most of my undergrad education was paid by horse judging scholarships, and I was on the team there. But that opened a door. When I got my master's, a new faculty member came in and he had an assistantship to coach a dairy judging team. And I'd been on the horse judging team and had that second major. And I was like, well, they just stand there. I'm sure I can learn, how to judge them, a little bit different than judging horses that are changing leads or, going over jumps or things like that. So I took that opportunity and reproduction physiology and hormones and things like that, it applies across species. You just have to adapt to the species you're working with. And I'd always been interested in reproduction because of the differences in mules and donkeys. And I'd grown up with mules and donkeys, and we had a breeding farm. And so I used the cattle as a model to look at ester synchronization. What was so interesting is that the dairy background later on came into play when I started doing some research in Eastern Europe and Italy with dairy donkeys. So that's a big growing industry. And I'm just so thankful that I took that opportunity that was a little bit different from being on a really strict equine path, which is where my passion, my love is. But, I took that open door. I learned more about the dairy industry. And then I was able to apply that in Italy when we were working with dairy donkeys and welfare and lactation curves, nutrition, welfare that applied to them. Just a fun fact, some of your listeners might find really interesting. Donkey milk is the closest thing to human's milk. And it's a very high-end product. So they've done all sorts of great research. First started out in China with some of the research looking at the similarities with human milk in terms of the composition. But a lot of infants, when they're transitioning from their mom's human breast milk then to a formula, they have an allergic reaction to cow's milk. So they found that donkey milk is a good supplement, a good replacement for that. So it's also used in cosmetic products. So good for anti-aging. So things I have to worry
I don't
about.
know how readily available is donkey milk in the US. Is it easy to come
Yeah.
by?
No, it's hard to find here. Usually what we can get here is a dehydrated product online. Part of why it's not available is what to do with the surplus foals. So
And so with all that difference in background, you kind of built around the equine as a whole instead of a certain horse species or horse breed or whatever you want to call it. You've had a number of different positions. You've worked industry, you've worked in academia. Do you think some of those, I guess where I'm going with this question is this, are again, working with young people, they get so targeted on a certain way. And it sounds like you let kind of the opportunity guide you into a different area and took the
yeah.
opportunity instead of trying to create the opportunity. Do you think that's kind of how it played out? And do you think that played into your ability to work industry, work academia? Because those are very different things. People who may not know both sides, they're almost opposite. And so do you think that diversity, was it the diversity of education that you had, or was it your open-mindedness to new ideas, or is it just timing and the opportunity?
Yeah, that's probably $1 million question. I think some of it was the openness to some of these opportunities that came along. Definitely some of the industry opportunities. In between my master's and my PhD, I worked for a really large equine nutrition company. And I still feed their product today. And that was a great experience working in the industry. And I guess growing up in the industry, I just have such a close tie and really want to give back to the industry and any kind of research or teaching that I'm doing, because I think sometimes it's easy to get a little bit removed from what happens in the real world. And so I just feel very passionate about trying to give back to an industry that has provided so many of these opportunities to me. So I do think it's really important that you do have a path that you want to follow, but you still sometimes, if there's a fork in the road, maybe try that other option, because you're going to learn and grow from it, even if it's not the right time or the right position, but you're going to still learn and you're going to gain so much from that. Going back to the reproduction, how I got to UC Davis was actually as an emergency hire running their horse breeding farm. So if I hadn't had that reproduction background and hadn't have done some of the other projects I'd done in repro, they probably wouldn't have called and asked me to come out and run their horse breeding farm. And then that led to, a faculty position. So again, I just think being open and also maybe not having such a strict timeline of I have to do this at this point and that point. And I mean, I'll be really honest, I'm a dreamer and I still sometimes dream about going back to vet school because that was a path that I'd set out to do. But there were all these other opportunities and doors that kept opening and the opportunity to do research. And they were paid opportunities. That was how I got to West Africa for my PhD. It was a USDA, a United States Department of Agriculture fellowship to improve livestock production in Mali, West Africa, which is a landlocked country, used to be the fourth poorest country in the world. And I proposed the idea of doing dairy research there because I thought they'd be most interested in that. And I mentioned donkeys in my letter of interest to Michigan State. And that was what they were so interested in because they're a lifeline to impoverished people and they're essential for their economy. So, again, I would have never in my wildest dreams thought that I could do research with animals that I just love so much and they've been ignored. But again, it's just kind of, I think, taking some of those opportunities and risk and just seeing where they lead to. So, but I never got to go back to vet school. Actually, I applied to vet school before I came out to Davis in September of 2016 and got in a couple schools. And I was like, okay, great. And then I got this opportunity. I was like, oh, I've always wanted to work at UC Davis because they had a mule breeding program. And you see that in other universities around the world where mules are still used for military and purposes like that. But I was like, okay, well, I'll defer vet school for a year, even though I was older. So I would have been a non-traditional student. But it's still in the back of my mind when so many of my students are going to vet school and they're so excited. And then I just see there's such a need for equine veterinarians and then a need for veterinarians that have that practical experience. And I do so much work with veterinarians and practitioners in terms of training and trying to provide information on mules and donkeys. And it just sometimes I want to do more, but I'm not trained to do more. But I'd like to be, I think, sometimes.
Well, I think it's one of the things that always helped us to be friends so much is because I think one, you're extremely positive person. You tend to see the bright side, the good side of things. And then you also have something I don't. I've talked about it on this podcast, and that is your risk assessment is much greater than mine. You have an ability to take calculated risks to do things that you think are going to be beneficial to you. And I think that's kind of how you got to this point, and was kind of the point I was trying to make was we should all, especially we have 18, 19, 20-year-olds coming in our offices and they think they've got their path situated or they've got this one focus area. And sometimes going with the flow is a really good thing. Going with the flow to see what opportunities present themselves, and it's taking you around the world and kind of leads us into this research question idea that I have that I want to kind of discuss with you is I know you've been to South America. I know you've been to Central America. You just mentioned I didn't know about West Africa, all in the name of research in your interested field. Give us some ideas about what are the primary interests that you have had in the past. And then in a minute, we'll discuss kind of where we're going to go in terms of what's next.
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, I started out with the research in West Africa and Mali with donkeys. We started out trying to do an insulin resistance study, and this was way back in 2006 when insulin resistance, PPID, all those equine metabolic forms of diseases were really popular and starting to be buzzwords, but there wasn't a lot of information even for horses and even less for donkeys. So we started down that trail. But when you're working in developing countries where electricity is not constant and you need to take multiple samples and freeze them and spin them down and do all that, after we did a pilot study, I was like, this is never going to work. I was like, the donkeys are survivalist. And yes, it's likely linked to a thrifty gene or insulin resistance, but we're not going to be able to solve that in West Africa. And that's really not going to help the donkeys there or the people they're working for. So stepped back. We looked at actually some behavior studies, some of the first work that was done with heart rate variability, which now any exercise physiology paper you see, they're looking at heart rate variability. Same thing with behavior. So we started looking at that. And then we also took my background of working with donkeys and mules, because you might get into this later, but I still actively show a mule on a national circuit. But took that kind of applied background and I started looking at different ways to train donkeys, thinking this might be more helpful to the veterinarians that we're working with in Mali, where they're treating these same lesions, same wounds, harness sores, but maybe some of this is a training issue. So let's look at different ways maybe to train donkeys and it's less stressful. And then again, when you go somewhere and you work, it doesn't matter what country you're in, you have to go there and understand what you're dealing with. And we see the same thing here in the US, just maybe a difference of how people ride horses, prepare horses, feed horses. It varies according to where you are and what resources you have. So it's a really kind of colonialistic view to go and go, well, this is the only way to do this. No, you need to go there, live there, understand, survey the situation before you can really help. So long story to get to where I'm going with this, but we started out looking at donkey nutrition research, kind of developed into some exercise physiology, behavior. The bigger picture ended up being train to trainers and just providing basic donkey information for those who are going to be in that country working as veterinarians or extension workers. Just what are some of the basic needs? And even today, like I said, I still work with a lot of different veterinary groups. Last year, this time I was in Wisconsin doing a 2-day talk about mule and donkey, just physiology, anatomy, pharmacology, all these differences for the equine practitioners in Wisconsin because they have a higher caseload. So today, the research, we've gone from basic nutrition to what are vitamin E requirements. More recently, I've gotten into some pharmacology study we did about a year ago that was really popular. I presented at the World Equine Vet Association meeting, and AEP was looking at a transdermal form of flunixin or banamine. So you simply put it on the back of a donkey, and the absorption rate was great. The circulating level in their blood was longer lasting than IV or oral paste. But again, a really practical, basic study. But a veterinarian could take it and use it today, and they could prescribe it to their owner, and their owner could then, treat their donkey for its pain. So some of the studies today have been a little bit more pharmacology, kind of, I want to say, veterinary owner friendly, that they can take that information and use it. Had a huge interest in the past 4 or 5 years in pain recognition in donkeys and mules, and then the way to alleviate that pain or recognize signs of trying to reduce it. So that's where a lot of the research has gone most recently.
That sounds a lot like a lot of what you're doing is outreach based. You mentioned extension, but
extension.
yeah, it's a lot of outreach based. Most extension programs are within their state, but you're taking information to another country and helping developing better management practices. And I think our listeners probably need, and I too, need to get some understanding, and you can help fill in the gaps here. Like you said, when we're helping people, we have our only thing we have to lean on is our own experience. And so when you're talking about you think about donkeys and mule numbers, US is not the most populated country. I'm going to guess like maybe Brazil, Mexico, some of these others. Yeah. And so you're dealing with a different environment, different number of resources, different way of living, different experience load there. Give us a feeling for what is the day-to-day life of a donkey and a donkey owner in a country that we're not familiar with.
Yeah, that's a great question. I've even had talks with people about how their donkey needs water in other countries because it is a living animal. So in most day-to-day life of a donkey in another country is really hard work. Working long hours, carrying heavy loads, and then at the end, a little bit of rest. And if the donkey's lucky, they'll turn it loose and go forage for food. Because of the increase in stealing donkeys for the donkey skin trade industry in China, now people are hobbling donkeys or locking up their donkeys to protect them from being stolen. So that's presented a huge issue. And now that people have to go out and collect food for their donkeys, where before at the end of the workday, they'd turn them loose and maybe they'd go find some forage on their own. So it's really become a welfare concern and then also just a new challenge in how people are caring for their animals that they'd never thought of before. I work a lot of places with a lot of young people, kids that are working donkeys and mules, because that's the reality of the country where they are. You mentioned Brazil. Brazil loves mules and donkeys because they're used on ranches, moving cattle and things like that. So you see a little bit better welfare because they're highly valued for those purposes. But Mexico has the second largest mule and donkey population behind Ethiopia, and then China's probably third. I try to do a lot of work in Mexico. I have some great colleagues there. And where you see most of the mules and donkeys working is in terrain where you can't get a tractor. But a lot of the different states in Mexico actually have government subsidy programs where they will subsidize a mule to farmers. So we've done some exercise fatigue studies and then also some castration studies throughout Mexico.
So the plight of the donkey and the mules, it's kind of heavy. Um,
Yeah.
you think, okay, just go buy him some feed and feed him better. That's kind of the solution here in the States is, well, we have resources to feed these animals, so go buy your feed and get him fed and get good hay and take. But you're talking, it sounds like to me like this just you some of these donkey and mule owners may be at the uh, discretion of what's available simply in their backyard.
Yes.
So talking to them about management concerns has got to be a very hard to navigate subject. And
Yeah, it really is. And the idea of buying feed is just generally unheard of in most countries. Now, the donkeys will carry feed and forage to the market for livestock, quote, but you hardly ever see an owner doing that by purchasing actual feed or forage for a donkey or a mule. The donkey is the cheapest form of labor behind human labor. So it's very impoverished people are working donkeys. Mules generally cost more across the world. So occasionally their care is maybe a little bit better, but it just depends. Most of the places, like you're talking about different countries, Central South America, more tropical areas. So there's more forage that's naturally available. When you work in like North Africa, East Africa, I'm on the board for a veterinary service called the American Fawn Duke in Fez, Morocco. And all of those mules are usually tethered at night and donkeys. And again, they're living in part of someone's house. So they've got to go and get feed and bring it to them. So that's a different situation. Now, if they're mules or donkeys, say in Morocco, living out in the countryside, then they'd have more forage availability. But yeah, it definitely changes depending on where you're working. But feeding, nutrition is definitely a big concern because then it leads to harness sores. And that eventually leads to the donkey or the mule not being as productive and working. And then the owner can't make as much money. Or the handler. A lot of times, the people working the donkeys or mules are not even the owners. They're just handlers or they're rented. So it's kind of like a rental car. They get the worst welfare.
are these guys very hardy then to be able to, what's the lifespan of a donkey in a developing country? Is it 5 years, 10 years?
Yeah, that's a great question. It just depends on kind of the use. When I started working in Mali, I worked with a vet charity called Spana, and they said the life expectancy when they started working there about 30 years ago was about 2 years for a donkey. And they'll start working them around a year and a half, 2 years of age. Now they've expanded that to about 10 years. So that's a really positive thing.
Yeah, they must be hardy because you think about horses, if you put them in a risky environment like that, when they were high workload, low calorie intake, they wouldn't last very long. Yeah.
Right.
So you mentioned a little while ago too, this concept of dairy with donkeys. Uh, my mind started thinking, one, that's not something that we talk a lot about here because it's not a utilizable form of milk here, commonly. And talk about an energy expenditure. In order to produce milk, this animal's got to have energy. So how do those two things go together? Are they utilizing milk off these donkeys as well, or do we have like a milk animal and a workload animal, or they cross use them, or how does that work?
Yeah, it's a great question. So most of the dairies in Eastern Europe, there's also a growing interest in Central and South America to use donkeys more strictly for dairy purposes. And China has a big interest as well. But they're being used primarily just for dairy donkeys. And what's interesting and challenging is that the foal has to stay on the jenny because when we wean a foal off a horse or off a donkey, then they dry up. So she has to produce enough milk for the foal and then also enough for the farmer so they have some to sell. A good dairy donkey will produce about 1 liter of milk, so it's like the size of a Coke bottle. And I think the going rate in Europe right now is about €20 for a liter of donkey milk. So, but yeah, that presented some really interesting research projects that I did with colleagues at the University of Torino in northwestern Italy, was looking at how long can we keep the foal off the Jenny to let her bag refill, milk her, and then the health of the foal is not compromised. So, and then can we also milk once a day, twice a day, 3 times a day? Like what's optimal for getting the most milk out of the Jenny, but then also the foal can still nurse and its growth and health is not compromised. The really cool thing about the dairy industry is it's preserved a lot of donkey breeds. So there's like 200 breeds of donkeys, just like breeds of horses. And it's given a new purpose for donkeys, especially throughout Europe, where they've been replaced by mechanization and tractors. And they've even seen that in Central and South America. And then also just the need because it is a human source of food that's really valuable. So it's given a new purpose and a new life to a lot of donkeys that would have simply vanished.
€20 for a liter is quite a bit. But cost and demand, I would think. And we're kind of, I hate that we're running to the end of our rope here, but because it's extremely interesting stuff, but I don't want to negate probably your biggest interest, and that is the showing side of the mule industry. So
Yeah.
some people may not even know that's out there. What is it? NASMA, I think, is the association for showing mules and donkeys too, I believe. Is that right?
Right. Yeah, there's NASMA, and then in California is actually the oldest mule and donkey show organization called the American Mule Association. Pat Pirelli actually had a hand in starting that in the mid 70s. And that group was started to provide a set of rules for Bishop Mule Days, the oldest kind of largest running mule show in the US. But yeah, so that's another huge love of mine is competing with mules. Don't generally show donkeys, even though that they are in the show circuit with us, but I prefer the mules. And it's basically similar to competing in a decathlon. They're asked to perform almost every discipline from dressage, jumping, driving. We were just at a fair here in Western Idaho last weekend and competed in boxing. So we do cattle events too. And my mule's about 16 hands. He's out of a warm blood quarter horse cross mare and then an Andalusian donkey. He's very athletic and he's been amazing. He's won lots of things and it's just really been fun to work with.
And you guys pull carts, cut cattle.
Yeah, we were
Wonderful.
at a driving show the past 2 days, actually showing against horses. So he's pretty handy driving. He's a little slow in this cattle work. He really likes cattle, but he's 16.3, so it has to be kind of a soft cow. Otherwise, we're gonna lose it. But yeah, and it's just, it's incredible because our horse world's so specialized and, we really, horses focus on one discipline, usually reining or cow horse, or maybe both, or, just hunters. But I mean, not to brag on my mule, but he can compete with horses. We recently showed at a big open horse show circuit out here called Golden Grand. And he won a saddle. He won the all arounds for the older amateur
Well, if he's 16.3,
category.
he should.
Right?
He,
But we did rail classes, we did patterns, we had Western riding, showmanship, trail, and he was one of the few equine there that did all of the classes that counted for that high point because our horse world's pretty specialized, good or bad.
and then talk about other uses. I mean, this is something that we ain't even talked about, but I know a lot of hunters that use mules quite extensively in the hunt field. Actually, not hunters, but not like English hunters, but actual fox hunters, coon hunters. Those they use. I knew a guy one time who was at a top level of the coon hunting associations or whatever they are, and he swore by mules. Like he wouldn't ride a horse, have nothing to do with a horse. He was all about the mules. That was his thing. So a lot of different arenas to be using these animals. Last question for you, Amy, before we got to run is, uh, just tell us just from your heart, what is it about the equine in general that gets you excited, gets you energized? When you get up in the morning, do you feel like you've hit the epitome of where you're at, or is there more that you want to do? Is this where you always dreamed you'd be? Because we got to have something that keeps driving us forward. Is the mule do that for you?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, I think the mules do just because of the versatility. I absolutely love doing the all around competitions. And I work with two or three trainers a week that I take riding lessons from, and just that push to always get better. But the bond that I feel with the mules is very different. It's very loyal. It's very trusting. And they don't like everybody, and mules are not for everybody. So they have different peculiarities. They're very sensitive. I've dealt with so many needle shy mules, and it's like you're this huge, strong creature. Like, why are you so scared of a little needle? Where I feel like the horses are more forgiving. But I love that challenge, and I like also the challenge of competing with an animal that you think couldn't do what a horse could do, and taking more time and just really learning, I think, the psychology behind how they're thinking and how you get that bond and that trust going. And I don't know, in riding, I think something, it's kind of like playing tennis. We can always get better at it. You can always learn more. And so that really pushes me. And I love to ride. I just can't think of better mental therapy too. I love that bond with the animal.
Yeah, it's all there in the horse and the mule too, and the donkey. Amy, you're one of my favorite people, and I appreciate you doing this for us. It gives us a definite different perspective on the vastness of the equine industry as a whole, and that's exactly what I want to do with this podcast. So you have done a great contribution to what we've wanted to do here. So love the picture in the background too. I think that fits wonderfully, and so I appreciate you doing this for us.
Well, thank you, Dr. Cavenger, for having me on. Always happy to talk about long ears.
And if people want to get a hold of you, I'll put a link to your page on UC Davis. Just they can maybe email you with a question or a concern about a donkey or a mule, and have your contact info.
Yep,
So
more than happy to. So,
thank you, Amy. Appreciate you.
thank you. Bye bye.
Bye.